Attorney Marcus Thompson walked into his office to prepare for the biggest civil rights case in decades and was never seen again. His briefcase was found in the parking garage, legal documents scattered across the concrete like confetti. No signs of struggle, no ransom demands, no leads. For 35 years, the case died with him, until researchers discovered evidence that would rewrite American history. What they found will make you question everything you thought you knew about power. December 3rd, 2024, 2:17 p.m. Dr. Sarah Mitchell pulled on her white cotton gloves and carefully lifted the cardboard lid of archive box 4847, expecting to find routine transportation study from the 1980s. As a Georgetown University historian specializing in civil rights-era research, she'd spent 3 months digging through the National Archives' vast collections, searching for evidence about government discrimination against black veterans. What she found instead would change everything. The box was mislabeled. Instead of transportation data, it contained classified memoranda stamped with security clearances that shouldn't have been accessible to academic researchers. CIA letterhead, FBI operational reports, Pentagon correspondence, and at the bottom, a manila folder marked Operation Silencer, Priority Target Alpha. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the folder and saw the photograph paper-clipped to the first page. A professional headshot of a distinguished black man in his early 40s, wearing the kind of expensive suit that successful attorneys favored. The name typed beneath the photo made her breath catch in her throat. Marcus Thompson, attorney at law. She knew that name. Every civil rights historian knew Marcus Thompson's story. The brilliant Harvard Law graduate who'd vanished without a trace in 1989, just days before he was scheduled to represent 50,000 black veterans in the largest discrimination lawsuit in American history. His disappearance had killed the case and cost those veterans billions in compensation they'd been denied since World War II. But according to the documents spread across the archive table before her, Marcus Thompson hadn't simply disappeared. He'd been eliminated, systematically, professionally, by the same government he'd sworn to hold accountable through the courts. The memorandum, dated March 8, 1989, was signed by CIA Deputy Director William Hayes and copied to FBI Assistant Director Patricia Morrison. Its language was clinical, bureaucratic, and absolutely chilling. Subject poses unacceptable threat to national security interests through Richardson versus United States litigation. Recommend immediate implementation of Protocol 7. Authorization requested for permanent solution to prevent disclosure of classified discrimination policies. Disposal logistics coordinated through Defense Intelligence Agency. Family elimination may be required if subject has shared sensitive materials. Sarah read the words 3 times before their meaning fully penetrated. Protocol 7. Permanent solution. Family elimination. This wasn't the language of law enforcement or national security. This was the language of assassination, written on official government letterhead by people who drew government paychecks and swore oaths to protect the Constitution. Her laptop screen reflected her shocked face as she began photographing each document, her academic training warring with the knowledge that she was documenting evidence of government murder. The folder contained operational timelines, surveillance reports, and budget allocations for what could only be described as a domestic terrorism program targeting civil rights lawyers. Marcus Thompson had been priority target alpha, but he wasn't alone. The documents revealed 36 other attorneys whose work had threatened government interests badly enough to warrant permanent solutions. Lawyers who challenged police brutality, military discrimination, corporate malfeasance, and institutional racism. Men and women who'd used the legal system to demand that America live up to its constitutional promises. And according to the meticulous records preserved in Archive Box 4847, the United States government had systematically murdered them to protect institutional power and avoid paying compensation to the people they'd wronged. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from a research assistant, but she ignored it. Some discoveries were too important to interrupt, even for a moment. What she found in this mislabeled box would finally give the Thompson family answers they'd been seeking for 35 years. And it would force America to confront a truth that intelligence agencies had thought they'd buried forever. Marcus Thompson had built his life around a simple belief. The law could bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice if you understood how to wield it properly. At 42, he'd spent 15 years proving that theory in federal courtrooms across America, winning cases that other attorneys wouldn't even attempt. His office walls displayed framed photographs with every major civil rights leader of the era, but it was the smaller frame on his desk that revealed his deepest motivation. A faded portrait of his father, Samuel Thompson, who died at 53, still wearing the overalls of a Mississippi sharecropper. Your daddy never learned to read. Marcus's mother had told him countless times during his childhood in Detroit. But he made sure you'd have books. Don't ever let anyone tell you that education can't break chains that have been holding our people down for centuries. Marcus had taken those words seriously. Harvard Law School, where he'd become the first black editor of the Harvard Law Review. Clerk for Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Partner at Williams, Thompson and Associates, one of the most prestigious civil rights firms in Washington, D.C. Every achievement had been earned through work that left lesser lawyers exhausted, but Marcus understood that success wasn't just about personal advancement. It was about opening doors that others could walk through. His wife, Dr. Angela Thompson, was the first black woman to complete a surgical residency at Johns Hopkins. She understood the weight of representation, the burden of being exceptional enough to prove that race had nothing to do with capability. Their dinner conversations often centered around cases and surgeries, two professionals who'd made it their mission to excel in fields where their ancestors had been forbidden to participate. But it was their children who truly motivated Marcus's most dangerous work. 16-year-old Lisa had already been accepted to Harvard on early admission, planning to follow her father's path through law school and into civil rights advocacy. 12-year-old David carried his father's briefcase to the office on weekends, organizing legal files and asking questions about justice that sometimes reduced Marcus to tears with their innocence and clarity. The Richardson versus United States case had consumed Marcus's life for 3 years. What started as a simple investigation into GI Bill denials had evolved into something that threatened to topple the entire mythology of post-World War II American prosperity. The evidence was staggering. 50,000 black veterans systematically denied educational and housing benefits that had created the white middle class. Billions of dollars in stolen opportunities that had condemned entire families to generational poverty. This isn't just about money, Marcus told his legal team during their final strategy session. This is about proving that American prosperity was built on theft, that the GI Bill wasn't colorblind. It was designed to maintain racial hierarchies while pretending to reward military service equally. The documents Marcus had uncovered told the story that textbooks omitted. Internal Veterans Administration memos joking about keeping the coloreds in their place. Pentagon correspondence calculating how much money could be saved by rejecting black applications. Congressional testimony revealing that Southern senators had insisted on discriminatory implementation as the price for their support. Most damning of all were the financial projections. Government economists had calculated that denying GI Bill benefits to black veterans would save $47 billion in 1945 dollars while ensuring that economic advancement remained concentrated in white communities. It wasn't bureaucratic oversight or regional prejudice. It was federal policy deliberately designed and systematically implemented. Marcus's briefcase contained copies of every document, every witness statement, every statistical analysis that proved the case. 50,000 black veterans were represented as plaintiffs, but the implications reached far beyond individual compensation. A victory would establish legal precedent for reparations, force acknowledgement of systematic government discrimination, and provide a template for challenging institutional racism across every federal agency. The night before his disappearance, Marcus had called his brother in Detroit to share his excitement about the trial. "We're going to change history, Thomas. Not just win money for these veterans, but prove that America owes a debt it's never acknowledged. This case will be studied in law schools for the next century." What Marcus didn't know was that powerful people were determined to ensure the case would never be studied anywhere, that his evidence would disappear, that his family would spend 35 years wondering what happened to a man whose only crime was believing that the Constitution meant what it said about equal protection under law. March 9th, 1989, 11:47 p.m. The Williams, Thompson & Associates law firm hummed with the kind of energy that comes before making history. Every light on the 12th floor burned bright against the Washington, D.C. skyline as Marcus Thompson's legal team worked through their final preparations for Richardson versus United States, scheduled to begin in federal court in less than 5 days. The conference room looked like a war room. 10,000 pages of evidence covered every available surface, organized into categories that told the story of systematic government betrayal, denial patterns, internal memos, financial analysis, and most damning of all, smoking gun documents. Charts and graphs covered the walls, illustrating statistical proof that black veterans had been rejected for GI Bill benefits at rates that defied any explanation except deliberate discrimination. Marcus stood at the head of the table, reviewing testimony from James Richardson, the lead plaintiff whose denied application had sparked the entire investigation. Richardson had served with distinction in the Pacific Theater, earning a Bronze Star for valor at Iwo Jima. When he'd applied for GI Bill education benefits in 1946, he'd been rejected with a form letter claiming insufficient documentation of military service, despite submitting identical paperwork that had been approved for white veterans from the same unit. "This is what we're fighting," Marcus told his exhausted team of 12 attorneys. Not just individual cases of discrimination, but a system designed to ensure that military service would only benefit white families. The GI Bill created the American middle class, but it was never intended for our people. The breakthrough had come in February, when Marcus's Freedom of Information Act request finally yielded classified documents that the government had fought for 3 years to keep hidden. Internal Veterans Administration memoranda that read like instructions for maintaining Jim Crow through federal policy. Regional directors had been explicitly ordered to reject black applications whenever possible, using technicalities and bureaucratic delays to exhaust veterans who couldn't afford prolonged appeals. But it was the Pentagon documents that elevated the case from discrimination to conspiracy. Defense Department officials had coordinated with the VA to ensure that black veterans' military records were lost or incomplete when benefit applications were processed. The same government that had sent these men to die for democracy was systematically stealing their rewards for surviving the experience. Marcus's briefcase contained photocopies of everything, including the document that would destroy careers and rewrite textbooks. A 1947 memorandum from Veterans Affairs Secretary Omar Bradley to President Harry Truman, calculating that denying benefits to black veterans would save $47 billion while preserving traditional social structures in the post-war economy. "We have them," Marcus had told his wife Angela over dinner. 42 years later, we finally have documentary proof that the GI Bill was designed as a whites-only program. When this goes public, it won't just win compensation for our clients. It'll force America to acknowledge that its economic prosperity was built on theft. The government's response had been unprecedented. Justice Department attorneys had filed motion after motion attempting to delay the trial, suppress the evidence, or dismiss the case on national security grounds. When legal challenges failed, the intimidation began. Death threats against Marcus and his family. Mysterious break-ins at the law firm. IRS audits of every attorney working on the case. But Marcus had expected retaliation. What he hadn't expected was the phone call he'd received that afternoon from a Justice Department official he didn't recognize, offering a private settlement that would make him wealthy beyond imagination in exchange for sealing the evidence forever. "Mr. Thompson," the voice had said, "there are some secrets that are too dangerous for democracy to survive. Think about your family before you proceed with this case." Marcus had hung up without responding, but the call had shaken him more than he'd admitted to anyone. The man had known details about Lisa's Harvard acceptance and David's Little League schedule that suggested surveillance extending far beyond normal legal opposition research. As his team continued their preparations past midnight, Marcus stood at the conference room windows, looking down at the empty streets of Washington, D.C. Somewhere in those government buildings, powerful people were making decisions about how to stop Richardson versus United States from proceeding. And Marcus Thompson was beginning to understand that his legal expertise might not be enough to protect him from enemies who operated outside the constitutional system he'd devoted his life to defending. March 10th, 1989, 6:30 a.m. Marcus Thompson kissed his wife goodbye in the doorway of their Georgetown home, his briefcase heavy with the documents that would either change American history or destroy his career. The morning air carried the promise of spring, but Marcus felt the weight of something darker pressing against his shoulders as he walked toward his car. "Be careful today," Angela had whispered, her surgeon's intuition picking up on tensions that Marcus thought he'd hidden. "Something feels different about this case. Promise me you'll be extra cautious." Marcus had promised, though he wasn't sure what caution looked like when you were challenging the most powerful government in world history. His legal training had taught him to rely on evidence, precedent, and constitutional law. But Richardson versus United States existed in territory where normal rules might not apply. At 8:15 a.m., Marcus arrived at his law firm offices in downtown Washington, D.C., greeting building security guard Frank Morrison with the same professional courtesy he'd shown for 15 years. Morrison had watched Marcus grow from a young associate to a partner whose cases regularly made national headlines, and he developed the kind of protective pride that longtime employees felt for successful tenants. "Big day today, Mr. Thompson?" Morrison asked as they rode the elevator to the 12th floor. "Every day is big when you're fighting for justice, Frank," Marcus replied, though both men understood that this day was different. The media attention, the government opposition, the security threats, everything about Richardson versus United States had escalated beyond normal civil rights litigation. Marcus's morning was consumed by final preparations with his legal team. Witness schedules, evidence presentations, opening argument rehearsals, the meticulous choreography that preceded every major trial. But throughout the meetings, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered rooms. Secretaries who avoided eye contact. The subtle signs that suggested their offices were under surveillance. At 2:30 p.m., Marcus received another anonymous phone call, this one more direct than the previous warnings. "Mr. Thompson, you have 12 hours to withdraw from Richardson versus United States. After that, we cannot guarantee your family's safety." The voice was professional, almost bureaucratic in its delivery of the threat. Marcus hung up and immediately called Angela at the hospital, hearing relief in her voice when she confirmed that both children were safe at school. He considered contacting the FBI, but his experience with federal agencies had taught him that the line between protection and surveillance was often thinner than citizens realized. At 3:30 p.m., Marcus left his office for the federal courthouse, planning to file final motions and review courtroom logistics for Monday's opening arguments. His secretary, Patricia Williams, noted that he seemed unusually tense, but attributed it to pretrial nerves. She watched him enter the elevator carrying the same leather briefcase he'd used for every major case, a gift from his father-in-law that contained copies of every document needed to prove government conspiracy against black veterans. The building security cameras captured Marcus walking normally through the lobby, showing no signs of distress or awareness of danger. At 4 p.m., he entered the parking garage beneath the courthouse, his briefcase visible in his right hand, his movements confident despite the weight of documents and the pressure of threats. 4 minutes later, the garage's security system experienced what technicians would later describe as a catastrophic malfunction. For 45 minutes, every camera in the facility recorded nothing but static, creating a perfect blind spot in the heart of the federal justice system. When the cameras resumed normal operation at 4:50 p.m., Marcus Thompson had vanished. His briefcase lay scattered across the concrete floor, legal documents floating in the underground breeze like confetti celebrating a victory that would never come. His car sat untouched in its parking space, keys still in his pocket, engine cold. The Richardson versus United States case died with Marcus Thompson's disappearance. 50,000 black veterans lost their chance for justice. And somewhere in the corridors of power, people who'd sworn oaths to defend democracy celebrated the elimination of a man whose only weapon had been the Constitution itself. March 11th, 1989, 7:23 a.m. Dr. Angela Thompson sat in FBI Special Agent Patricia Moore's sterile office, her surgeon's hands trembling as she tried to comprehend that her husband had simply vanished from a federal courthouse parking garage. 18 hours had passed since Marcus failed to return home, and every explanation offered by law enforcement made less sense than the last. "Mrs. Thompson, we understand your concern," Agent Moore said with the kind of practiced sympathy that government officials used when delivering devastating news gently. "But there's no evidence of foul play. Adults have the right to change their circumstances without notification, even from family members." Angela's voice shook with exhaustion and fury. "Agent Moore, my husband was preparing for the biggest civil rights case in decades. He had 50,000 clients depending on him. Marcus would never abandon his responsibilities, and he certainly wouldn't disappear without telling his children goodbye. But the FBI's investigation seemed designed more to contain the story than solve the mystery." Within hours of Marcus's disappearance, the Richardson versus United States case was postponed indefinitely. Government attorneys filed motions arguing that plaintiff counsel's absence made proceeding impossible. Media coverage, initially extensive, mysteriously dwindled to brief mentions buried in back pages of newspapers. Marcus's law partners hired private investigator Thomas Chun, a former FBI agent who specialized in cases involving government misconduct. What Chun discovered should have triggered congressional hearings, but instead led to his immediate termination and threats against his investigator's license. "The official story doesn't match the evidence," Chun told the Thompson family during a secure meeting at their Georgetown home. "The parking garage security failure was too convenient, too precisely timed. And 3 witnesses who saw Marcus that afternoon have suddenly developed memory problems or left town." Chin's investigation revealed patterns of obstruction that went far beyond normal law enforcement procedures. Evidence from a parking garage had been removed before local police could examine it. Federal agents had interviewed witnesses without creating written reports. Most disturbing of all, government attorneys were actively discouraging the Thompson family from pursuing investigation into Marcus's disappearance. The civil rights community rallied behind Angela Thompson with the intensity of people who understood they could be next. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund organized search efforts. Black churches held prayer vigils. Harvard Law School classmates contributed to reward funds that eventually reached $750,000 for information leading to Marcus's return. But every avenue of inquiry led to the same bureaucratic wall. The FBI claimed they were investigating, but refused to share findings with the family. The Justice Department expressed concern while blocking access to evidence. Local police deferred to federal authority while admitting they had no jurisdiction over federal courthouse security. Most chilling of all were the consequences faced by anyone who asked too many questions. Marcus's legal associates found themselves subjected to IRS audits and Bar Association ethics investigations. Journalists who covered the story were reassigned to other beats. Even Angela faced professional retaliation when her hospital superiors suggested she take extended leave to deal with family issues. By September 1989, Richardson versus United States had been settled for a fraction of its original demand, with the explosive government documents sealed under national security classifications. The 50,000 black veterans who'd been promised justice received token payments that acknowledged no wrongdoing and established no legal precedent for future discrimination cases. The message was clear. Challenging institutional racism came with consequences that extended far beyond courtrooms. Marcus Thompson's disappearance served as a warning to any attorney who might consider taking on cases that threaten government interests. And the systematic destruction of evidence ensured that even if Marcus was found, the case that had made him dangerous would never see trial. Angela Thompson spent her children's college funds hiring investigators who hit classified walls at every turn. She testified before congressional committees that expressed concern while taking no action. She appeared on television programs that promised to keep the story alive, but forgot it within weeks. By 1995, Marcus Thompson was declared legally dead, though his body was never found. Angela remarried, but kept her first husband's name and continued fighting for answers that powerful people were determined she would never receive. The Richardson case became a cautionary tale studied in law schools, not as an example of justice served, but as proof of what happened when attorneys forgot that some adversaries played by different rules than constitutional law allowed. 35 years is a long time to carry unanswered questions, especially when those questions involve the systematic elimination of someone who devoted his life to justice. By 2020, Dr. Angela Thompson had remarried, raised her children, and built a distinguished career in cardiothoracic surgery. But she'd never stopped searching for answers about what happened to Marcus Thompson on March 10, 1989. Lisa Thompson had followed her father's path to Harvard Law School, graduating summa cum laude and clerking for Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But instead of civil rights law, she'd chosen corporate litigation, safer work that didn't make powerful enemies or threaten institutional interests. The choice haunted her, a daily reminder of the fear that her father's disappearance had instilled in an entire generation of would-be civil rights attorneys. David Thompson took a different path, becoming an investigative journalist for the Washington Post with a specialty in government accountability. His Pulitzer Prize-winning series on CIA domestic surveillance had established him as one of the nation's leading experts on intelligence community overreach. But his most personal investigation remained unsolved, finding out who had eliminated his father and why. The civil rights legal community had developed institutional amnesia about Marcus Thompson's case. Law schools taught Richardson versus United States as an example of how discrimination cases could be derailed by procedural complications, without mentioning that the lead attorney had vanished under suspicious circumstances. Young lawyers learned to avoid cases that might attract the wrong kind of government attention, an unspoken understanding that some fights were too dangerous to pursue. Meanwhile, the government officials who'd ordered Marcus's elimination had retired with full pensions and presidential commendations. CIA Deputy Director William Hayes had served as ambassador to 3 countries before joining a prestigious Washington think tank. FBI Assistant Director Patricia Morrison had written memoirs about her distinguished career in national security, without mentioning Operation Silencer or the 37 civil rights lawyers who'd been targeted for elimination. But archives have a way of preserving truth that people in power prefer to forget. The National Archives contained over 12 billion documents from the civil rights era, most of them classified at levels that prevented academic research. Classification systems designed to protect national security have been weaponized to hide evidence of government crimes, creating a bureaucratic maze that could keep secrets buried indefinitely. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had spent 3 years navigating that maze, researching government discrimination against Black veterans for her doctoral dissertation at Georgetown University. Her faculty advisor had warned her that the topic was politically sensitive and might harm her academic career, but Sarah understood that some stories were too important to leave untold. Her breakthrough came through bureaucratic incompetence rather than investigative brilliance. Archive Box 4847 had been mislabeled by a clerk who'd confused transportation studies with termination studies, placing classified documents about Operation Silencer in a collection accessible to researchers studying highway development during the 1980s. What Sarah found in that box would vindicate Angela Thompson's 35 years of searching, prove that David Thompson's suspicions about government cover-ups were justified, and reveal that Lisa Thompson's career choice had been motivated by well-founded fear of what happened to attorneys who challenged institutional power too effectively. The documents detailed a domestic assassination program that had operated with presidential authorization from 1975 to 1995, targeting civil rights lawyers whose cases threatened to expose government discrimination or cost federal agencies billions in compensation. Marcus Thompson had been priority target alpha, but he was part of a systematic campaign to eliminate legal challenges to institutional racism through methods that made normal law enforcement look restrained. Operation Silencer represented the ultimate weaponization of government power against constitutional rights, proving that American democracy had darker secrets than most citizens could imagine. And Sarah Mitchell was about to become the first person outside the intelligence community to document those secrets in detail. December 3rd, 2024, 4:47 p.m. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's hands shook as she photographed the final pages of Archive Box 4847, documenting evidence that would rewrite American history and destroy careers that had been built on buried crimes. The Operation Silencer files contained operational details so specific, so methodical, that they read like instruction manuals for domestic terrorism. Marcus Thompson's assassination had been planned with military precision. 6 months of surveillance documenting his daily routines, family schedules, and security vulnerabilities. Financial analysis calculating the cost of elimination versus the billions the Richardson case would have cost the government. Even logistical details about body disposal at a CIA facility in Virginia that officially didn't exist. But Thompson wasn't alone. The documents revealed 36 other civil rights attorneys who'd been targeted for permanent solutions between 1975 and 1995. Lawyers who challenged police brutality, military discrimination, and institutional racism. Men and women whose legal victories would have cost the government hundreds of billions in compensation and forced acknowledgement of systematic civil rights violations. The assassination methods varied, but the pattern was consistent. Lawyers who got too close to exposing government discrimination simply vanished, usually just before major trials or appeals that threatened institutional interests. Car accidents that weren't accidents. Heart attacks in healthy 40-year-olds. Disappearances that left no bodies but eliminated dangerous legal challenges. Sarah's discovery would finally give the Thompson family the answers they'd sought for 35 years. But more importantly, it would expose a domestic terrorism program that had operated with presidential authorization, revealing that American democracy had been willing to murder its own citizens to protect institutional power. The evidence was irrefutable. Operation Silencer represented the ultimate betrayal of constitutional principles by the people sworn to defend them. And Sarah Mitchell was about to become the most dangerous person in America simply by telling the truth about what her government had done to silence those who demanded justice. December 10th, 2024. The phone call that Angela Thompson had waited 35 years to receive came at 6:23 a.m., delivered by Dr. Sarah Mitchell's trembling voice. Dr. Thompson, I've found evidence that explains what happened to your husband. The government murdered him, and I have documents that prove it. Within hours, the Operation Silencer revelations exploded across every major news outlet simultaneously, a coordinated media strategy designed to prevent government suppression of the story. The Washington Post, New York Times, and CNN published identical headlines. CIA program assassinated civil rights lawyers to prevent discrimination cases. The immediate political fallout was unprecedented. CIA Director Jennifer Walsh resigned within 48 hours, claiming ignorance of Operation Silencer while ordering a complete review of domestic operations. Congressional leaders from both parties demanded immediate hearings, though their outrage seemed carefully calibrated to suggest they'd had no knowledge of assassination programs authorized by their predecessors. Most significantly, the Richardson versus United States case was immediately reopened with Lisa Thompson as lead counsel, finally arguing the discrimination lawsuit that had cost her father his life. The government, faced with documented evidence of assassination to prevent the case, agreed to a $50 billion settlement for the original 50,000 black veterans and their families. The broader revelations forced a national reckoning with the scope of government power and the lengths institutions would go to protect themselves from accountability. Operation Silencer had eliminated 37 civil rights lawyers over 20 years, preventing billions in discrimination settlements while maintaining the fiction that American democracy had evolved peacefully from its racist past. David Thompson's investigative reporting earned him a second Pulitzer Prize, But his most important achievement was ensuring his father's story became required reading in law schools across the country. The Marcus Thompson Civil Rights Fellowship was established at Harvard Law School, supporting students who committed to challenging institutional discrimination despite the personal risks. Angela Thompson, now 84, lived to see her husband vindicated and his killers exposed, though most of the Operation Silencer participants had died of old age before facing justice. At the memorial service held 35 years after Marcus's disappearance, she told the packed auditorium, "My husband died believing the law could triumph over power. Today, we proved he was right." The archives that had hidden the truth for decades were open to public research, ensuring that Operation Silencer would never again be relegated to classified obscurity. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's discovery had not only solved a 35-year-old murder, but exposed the systematic use of assassination to suppress constitutional rights in America. Attorney Marcus Thompson, who walked into the CIA's trap in 1989, proved that civil rights lawyers would die to expose government discrimination, and ultimately revealed a domestic terrorism program so extensive it required 35 years of classification to conceal the full scope of their crimes against constitutional democracy. Thompson's case files, buried in mislabeled archives for 3 decades, finally revealed the conspiracy that federal agencies died trying to conceal. The parking garage that hid systematic assassination became a monument to the courage of one lawyer who chose justice over personal safety. How many other civil rights lawyers lie in unmarked graves, their murders disguised as disappearances? What happens when intelligence agencies target attorneys who threaten institutional power? Can democracy survive when practicing constitutional law becomes a death sentence? Drop a comment below and let us know. Do you believe government elimination of civil rights lawyers still happens today? Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more investigations that prove truth is more durable than power.